Part 1: The Discovery. It was one of those quiet evenings where everything seemed too perfect, almost unnervingly so. The house was still, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. I was 7 months pregnant, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea balanced precariously on my belly. The baby had been kicking up a storm all day, and I found myself talking to him, telling him about the life I thought we were going to have. James had been distant for months. At first, I blamed it on the stress of impending fatherhood. He worked long hours, came home late, and barely made an effort to talk to me. But I convinced myself this was just a phase. After all, people handle change differently. Or so I thought. That night, James was in the shower, and I noticed his phone buzzing on the coffee table. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. James valued his privacy, and I respected that. But this time, the constant buzzing grated on my nerves. I leaned over, intending only to silence the notifications. Then I saw her name. Lila. My sister. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen. It's probably innocent, I told myself. Maybe they were planning something for the baby, like a surprise shower. But deep down, a sinking feeling told me otherwise. The curiosity was too much to resist. My trembling fingers unlocked the phone, and there it was. A conversation that shattered the reality I thought I was living. It wasn't just a few casual texts. The messages were intimate, the kind that sent a chill straight to your core. They joked about their secret getaway. They talked about how hard it had been to keep their feelings hidden. And then, the final nail in the coffin. I can't wait to make this official. You're the love of my life, Lila. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. My vision blurred as tears welled up, but I couldn't look away. I scrolled further, desperate to understand how long this had been going on. Every message was a new wound, cutting deeper and deeper. There were plans, detailed plans. They discussed how to break the news to me after the baby was born, as if that would make it less of a betrayal. They were plotting a future together while I was here, carrying James's child, believing we were building a family. The tea went cold in my hands as I stared blankly at the screen. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my mind, none of them coherent. How could he do this to me? How could she do this to me? The betrayal wasn't just from my husband. It was from my sister. The one person I thought I could trust unconditionally. I heard the water shut off in the bathroom. Panic surged through me, and I quickly placed the phone back on the coffee table, trying to compose myself. My heart raced as I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater. I couldn't confront him, not yet. Not until I knew what I wanted to say. When James walked into the living room, his hair damp and a towel slung over his shoulder, he gave me the same casual smile he'd always given. That same smile I once thought was so warm and genuine now felt like a lie. "How's my favorite girl doing?" he asked, leaning down to kiss my forehead. I froze. My mind screamed at me to shove him away, to confront him, to ask him how he could look me in the eyes and pretend everything was fine. But instead I played along. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. "Baby kicking much today?" he asked, placing his hand on my belly. The touch, which once brought me comfort, now felt like a violation. "Yeah, he's been active," I said, my words clipped. James didn't seem to notice my discomfort, or maybe he just didn't care. He walked off to the bedroom, humming a tune as if he hadn't just shattered my life. I sat there, staring at the darkened screen of my own phone, trying to process what had just happened. I felt anger bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. But more than that, I felt an overwhelming sadness. For the life I thought I had. For the husband I thought I knew. And for the sister I thought I could trust. As the minutes ticked by, one thing became clear. I couldn't let this slide. But I also couldn't act impulsively. James and Lila thought they had all the power. They thought I was clueless. They were wrong. Part 2: The Silent Plot. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of James bustling around the kitchen. It was unusual. He was rarely up before me, and the smell of burnt toast wafting down the hallway confirmed he hadn't suddenly become a master chef. "Morning," he said brightly when I shuffled into the kitchen. His tone was so normal it made my skin crawl. How could he act like nothing had happened? Like he wasn't actively planning to leave me for my sister? "Morning," I mumbled, pouring myself a glass of orange juice. My eyes darted to the tablet on the counter, the one I'd used to discover his betrayal. He had no idea I'd found the messages. That much was clear from the way he casually buttered his charred toast. "I was thinking we should take it easy this weekend," he said, leaning against the counter. "Maybe a movie night? Just the two of us." I bit back a bitter laugh. Just the two of us, huh? Wonder if Lila knows she's not invited. Sure, I said instead, forcing a tight smile. James grinned, seemingly satisfied, and kissed my forehead before heading out the door. As soon as it shut, I sank onto a kitchen chair, letting the mask I'd been wearing drop. My mind raced with questions. Should I confront him now? Should I call Lila and unleash my rage? Or should I wait, gather my strength and plan my next move? The last option felt the most satisfying. James and Lila were calculating, sneaky. If I confronted them now, they'd deny everything and spin their lies into something that made me look irrational. No, I needed to outsmart them. Step 1, gathering evidence. After taking a deep breath, I grabbed my laptop and started digging. I logged into our shared email account. Not the one James used for his affair, but the one linked to his work and finances. It was a treasure trove of information. Bank statements showed he had been withdrawing cash in suspicious amounts. He claimed it was for business lunches. But I knew better now. Then there was the itinerary for a trip to Cancun. The departure date? 2 weeks after my due date. 2 tickets booked in his name and Lila's. Each discovery felt like a slap in the face, but it fueled my resolve. If they wanted to betray me, I'd make sure they paid for it. Next, I contacted a private investigator. I wasn't sure if hiring one was overkill, but I didn't want to leave anything to chance. I wanted to know how deep this betrayal went. Step 2, the financial edge. As I waited for the investigator to do their work, I turned my attention to the one thing James had never understood about me, my career. James had always believed his $90,000 salary was the foundation of our lives, the reason we lived comfortably. He thought my freelance work was a hobby, something I did to keep busy. He had no idea I was the real breadwinner. Over the years, my software development business had grown exponentially. I'd kept the finances separate, partly to protect myself in case of a worst-case scenario. And here it was, the worst-case scenario. I logged into my business accounts and reviewed the numbers. The 6-figure income James had been so proud of paled in comparison to what I brought in. It was satisfying in a dark way to know that while he thought he held all the cards, I had an ace up my sleeve, and I was going to use it. Step 3, setting the trap. That evening I acted as if everything was normal. James came home, kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day. It was fine, I said, shrugging. Just working on a project. Good, he replied, distracted as he scrolled through his phone, probably texting her. I didn't let it show, but I was seething. Every glance at his screen, every absent-minded smile, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. But I knew better than to let my emotions get the better of me. Instead, I played the role of the oblivious wife, all while putting my plan into motion. The private investigator called the next day with updates. Your suspicions are correct, he said. They've been meeting regularly at a hotel downtown. I've got photos and timestamps. My stomach churned at the confirmation, but I thanked him and asked him to send everything over. Step 4, the slow burn. James and I had dinner together that night. I sat across from him at the table, pretending to hang on his every word as he talked about his day. In reality, I was imagining the look on his face when everything came crashing down. You seem distracted, he said suddenly, narrowing his eyes. Oh, just tired, I said, smiling softly. The baby's been kicking a lot. It's hard to sleep. His expression softened, and for a moment, I saw the man I fell in love with, the man I thought I'd build a life with. But then I remembered the text, the plane tickets, the betrayal, and that tenderness turned to ice. As James cleared the dishes, I leaned back in my chair, feeling the baby shift inside me. He was my anchor now, my reason to keep going. And as I rested my hands on my swollen belly, I made a silent promise. We wouldn't just survive this betrayal. We would rise above it. Part 3. The calm before the storm. It had been a week since I discovered James's betrayal, and every day since felt like a tightrope walk over a pit of fire. The morning started with the facade of normalcy. James sipping his coffee, scrolling on his phone, pretending to be the loving husband he had long ceased to be. I played my part, smiling faintly, answering his small talk, all the while suppressing the urge to scream. But behind the scenes, I was a whirlwind of activity. The private investigator's findings had arrived in my inbox the night before, and I spent hours combing through the files. Photos of James and Lila leaving a downtown hotel arm in arm, timestamps that matched the cash withdrawals from our shared account, and the clincher, a candid shot of them kissing in the hotel parking lot. The evidence wasn't just damning, it was airtight. That morning as I sat across from James at the breakfast table, I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. He had no idea what was coming, no inkling that the wife he was so eager to discard had already outmaneuvered him. Step 1: Playing the long game. I decided to test the waters. James, I said casually as I stirred my tea, I was thinking we should start planning the nursery this weekend. You know, pick out some colors, maybe buy a crib. He looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. Yeah, sure. That sounds good. I studied him, searching for any sign of guilt or hesitation, but his face was a mask of indifference. It was infuriating. How could he sit there and pretend to care about our unborn child while secretly planning to abandon us? That's great, I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'll make a list of things we need. As James went back to scrolling through his phone, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Let him think I was clueless. Let him think he had the upper hand. It would make the fall all the more satisfying. Step 2: Assembling my arsenal. After James left for work, I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Claire who had built her career dismantling unfaithful spouses. She reviewed the evidence I had gathered, her tone growing sharper with every passing minute. This is more than enough, she said finally. We can hit him hard. Financially, legally, and emotionally. I want full custody of the baby, I said firmly. And I don't want him to get a dime more than he's entitled to. Claire chuckled. Don't worry. Men like him think they're untouchable. They think they can walk away without consequences. He has no idea what he's up against. Her confidence was infectious. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I felt in control. Step 3: Lila's game. Lila, on the other hand, was a wild card. She had always been unpredictable, a master manipulator who thrived on chaos. I knew she'd try to spin the situation in her favor, to paint herself as the victim in this sordid affair. So I decided to beat her at her own game. That afternoon I called her. Lila, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Can we talk? Her tone was cautious. What's this about? I want to understand, I said, letting my voice break. Why him? Why now? There was a long pause before she spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said, her voice dripping with faux regret. James and we just connected. You wouldn't understand. I bit back a retort, letting her dig her own grave. But how could you do this to me? To the baby? I didn't plan it, she said defensively. But love isn't something you can control. I'm sorry you got hurt, but James and I are happy. Isn't that what matters? I hung up before I could explode. Her audacity was almost admirable. She genuinely believed she could justify her betrayal, as if her happiness outweighed my devastation. Step 4: The financial edge. That evening I logged into our joint accounts. James had no idea that while he was plotting his escape, I had already siphoned our savings into an account under my name. It wasn't theft, it was preparation. The majority of the money was mine anyway, earned through my business ventures while he believed his income was the lifeline of our household. I'd left just enough in the joint account to keep him from suspecting anything. Next, I contacted my financial advisor to finalize a plan for the months ahead. I want to ensure that everything I've built is protected, I told her. She nodded, taking meticulous notes. We'll set up a trust for your son. That way his future is secure, no matter what happens. Step 5: Planting the seeds. James came home that night with his usual carefree demeanor. Hey, he said, dropping his keys on the counter. Hi, I said, handing him a plate of leftovers. As he ate, I casually brought up the idea of a family trip after the baby was born. We could go to the mountains, I suggested. It might be nice to get away for a bit. He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, maybe. I could tell he was lying, but I let it go. He didn't know that I already had copies of his Cancun itinerary, complete with his and Lila's names. Step 6: The calm before the storm. Later that night, as James slept beside me, I lay awake, my hand resting on my belly. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of the life growing inside me. The life I was determined to protect. I had given James and Lila the illusion of control, but it was time to shatter that illusion. They had no idea the storm that was coming. Part 4: The confrontation. The morning of the confrontation, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. James was still asleep, his soft snores drifting from the bedroom. I sat at the dining table, a steaming cup of tea in my hands, rehearsing the words I'd been planning to say for days. By now, the private investigator's report was safely tucked into my bag, along with copies of the photos, financial records, and plane tickets. It was a damning arsenal, one I'd wield with precision, but the real weapon was me. I was no longer the quiet, accommodating wife James thought he could leave behind. Today I was the storm he never saw coming. The setup. James, I called softly as I walked into the bedroom. He stirred, blinking at me with a mix of sleepiness and mild annoyance. "What's up?" "I made breakfast," I said, smiling warmly. "Come eat with me." He groaned but followed me into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. The table was set with his favorite meal: pancakes, scrambled eggs, and crispy bacon. He looked surprised, maybe even suspicious, but he didn't say anything as he sat down. I watched him eat for a moment, the sound of his fork scraping the plate grating on my nerves. It was almost comical, the way he devoured the food, oblivious to what was about to unfold. I was thinking. I began keeping my tone light. Maybe we should talk about our future. He froze mid-bite, his fork hovering in the air. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said, leaning forward slightly, "with the baby coming, I think it's important for us to be on the same page. Don't you?" James nodded, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Of course. I mean, I've been thinking about that too." "Good," I said, pulling the private investigator's report from my bag and sliding it across the table. "Because I think we need to address this first. The explosion." James stared at the folder as if it might bite him. Slowly, he reached for it, his movements stiff and robotic. The room was so quiet I could hear the rustle of paper as he opened the file. His face turned ashen as he flipped through the pages. The photos, the receipts, the plane tickets, all of it was laid bare in black and white. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Oh really?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because it looks like you've been sneaking around with my sister, planning a romantic getaway while leaving me, your pregnant wife, behind." "It's complicated," he said weakly, his hands trembling as he shoved the papers back into the folder. "Complicated," I repeated, my voice rising. "Let me simplify it for you. You're a lying, cheating coward who betrayed not only me but our unborn child." James stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he said, his voice defensive. "Lila and we didn't plan this. It just happened." "Oh, spare me the clichés," I snapped, rising to my feet. "You didn't fall into this affair, James. You made a choice. And now you're going to face the consequences." The bombshell. He glared at me, his anger finally matching mine. "What do you want from me, huh? You want me to stay in a marriage that's clearly over? I love Lila, and I'm not going to apologize for that." I let out a bitter laugh. "You think this is about love? You don't even know what love is. This is about respect, decency, and the fact that you were willing to throw me and our baby away for some cheap fantasy." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop him. "And let me be clear," I continued, my voice cold and steady. "You have no idea what you're walking away from. You think you're the provider in this marriage? Think again. While you were playing house with my sister, I was building a business. I make $450,000 a year, James. Did you know that?" "No, of course you didn't, because you were too busy patting yourself on the back for being the man of the house." His eyes widened, his bravado crumbling. "What?" "That's right," I said, crossing my arms. "Everything we have, the house, the savings, the lifestyle, it's because of me. And now that you're leaving, you're not getting a single penny of it." The aftermath. James looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He slumped back into his chair, his face a mix of shock, anger, and humiliation. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I'll make sure you pay child support," I added, my tone sharp. "But other than that, you're on your own. You and Lila can figure out how to scrape by without my money." He didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the table, his hands clenched into fists. As I walked out of the kitchen, I felt a surge of adrenaline. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt powerful. I had taken control of the narrative, and James was left to deal with the wreckage of his choices. Part 5. Lila's Reckoning. The confrontation with James left me emotionally drained but triumphant. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control over my life. But there was still one loose end: Lila. She hadn't seen the storm coming either, and it was time to ensure she felt the weight of her betrayal. I didn't call her. Lila didn't deserve a heads up. Instead, I arranged to meet her at her favorite cafe, under the guise of wanting to talk things through. She arrived 15 minutes late, sauntering in with her signature confidence. She wore a designer trench coat and sunglasses, as if she were starring in a movie about her own life. "Hey," she said breezily, sliding into the seat across from me. I looked at her for a long moment, studying her. How could someone who shared my blood be so utterly devoid of empathy? "Thanks for meeting me," I said, forcing a tight smile. She sighed dramatically, as if this were a chore for her. "Look, I know you're upset, but you have to understand, James and I didn't plan for this to happen. It's love, and love doesn't always come at the right time." Her words were like nails on a chalkboard. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You really believe that, don't you?" "It's the truth," she said, her tone defensive. "You'll see someday. Once you've moved on, you'll understand." "Oh, I understand plenty," I said, my voice icy. I pulled the folder from my bag and slid it across the table. "Go ahead, take a look." The revelation. Lila hesitated, her manicured fingers hovering over the folder. "What's this?" "Evidence," I said. "Of your little affair. Of James's lies. Of the financial disaster you've both walked into." Her brow furrowed, but she opened the folder. As she flipped through the pages, her expression shifted from confusion to shock to sheer panic. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That's not important," I said, smirking. "What matters is that I've already used it to secure my position. James has nothing. No job, no money, and no future with me or my child." Lila's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. For once she was speechless. The warning. I leaned in, my tone low and dangerous. "You thought you were getting a prize, didn't you? You thought James was the golden ticket to your fantasy life. Well, newsflash, Lila, he's broke. And once the court orders him to pay child support, he'll have even less." She tried to recover, scoffing. "You can't blame me for falling in love." I chuckled darkly. "Falling in love? Please. You didn't fall in love, Lila. You saw an opportunity to take something that was mine because you couldn't stand to see me happy. This isn't about James. It's about you being a selfish, jealous brat." Her face flushed, but she didn't deny it. "Let me make one thing clear," I continued, my voice steady. "If you and James think you're going to waltz off into the sunset, think again. I'll make sure neither of you comes near me or my child ever again. And if you so much as try to interfere with my life, I won't hesitate to bury you both." Lila glared at me, her facade of confidence cracking. "You don't scare me." I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "Good. Because this isn't a threat, Lila. It's a promise." James and Lila's downfall. A few weeks later, the fallout from my confrontation with James began to ripple through their lives. James had been jobless since I exposed his financial misconduct to his employer. He had drained his savings trying to keep up with Lila's expensive tastes, but it was a losing battle. Lila, who had always prided herself on her ability to land on her feet, found herself sinking fast. Without James's income, or mine for that matter, she struggled to maintain her lifestyle. Her designer clothes, weekly spa treatments, and luxury vacations became relics of a past she couldn't afford to sustain. I heard through the grapevine that they'd moved into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. The romance they had flaunted so shamelessly quickly turned into resentment as reality set in. They argued constantly, blaming each other for their predicament. A satisfying encounter. One afternoon, I ran into Lila at the grocery store. She looked different, tired, frazzled. Her once polished appearance replaced with a hastily thrown-together outfit. She avoided my gaze, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. "Lila," I said, my voice dripping with mock sweetness. She froze, forcing a smile. "Oh, hi. How are you?" "Wonderful," I replied, glancing at the baby in the cart beside me. "Oliver and I are doing great." Her eyes darted to the baby, then back to me. "That's good to hear." I tilted my head, pretending to study her. "And you? How's James?" "Adjusting to his new lifestyle." Her forced smile faltered. "We're fine." "Good," I said, smirking. "Well, I'd love to stay and chat, but some of us have lives to get back to. Take care, Lila." I walked away, feeling a rush of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my power. The turning point. That night, as I tucked Oliver into bed, I reflected on everything that had happened. James and Lila had tried to destroy me, but I had risen above their betrayal. I had built a new life, one filled with strength, independence, and the unwavering love of my son. The storm had passed and I was still standing. Part 6: New Beginnings. Months passed, and with every passing day, I felt lighter, stronger. The weight of James's betrayal no longer consumed me. Instead, I was consumed by something far more fulfilling: my son Oliver. Oliver became the center of my universe, his tiny giggles and curious eyes a constant reminder of what truly mattered. I had built a life for us that was full of warmth, stability, and love. My business continued to thrive, allowing me the freedom to spend my days with him and my evenings planning our future. But as much as I cherished our little world, there was one thing I couldn't ignore: the possibility of opening my heart again. The invitation. One evening, while scrolling through emails, I came across an invitation to a tech conference in Seattle. It was the kind of event I used to attend regularly before pregnancy and betrayal turned my life upside down. The idea of stepping back into that world felt both exciting and terrifying. I debated for days. Was it too soon to focus on myself? Would Oliver be okay with my mom for a weekend? Was I ready to put myself out there again, even professionally? Eventually, I decided to go. Not just for the networking, but to reclaim a piece of myself I had set aside. An unexpected encounter. The conference was a whirlwind of panels, presentations, and cocktail hours. It felt good to be surrounded by ambitious, like-minded people again. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't the betrayed wife or the single mom. I was just me. On the last day, as I was sipping coffee between sessions, a man approached me. He was tall, with a sharp suit and an easy smile. "I couldn't help but notice you asked the most insightful question during the panel," he said. I laughed, a little caught off guard. "Thanks. I have a habit of putting speakers on the spot." "I'm Ethan," he said, extending his hand. "Allison," I replied, shaking it. We ended up talking for the rest of the break. Ethan was the CEO of a startup in San Francisco, and our conversation flowed effortlessly. It wasn't flirtatious, not exactly, but there was a warmth to it that I hadn't felt in a long time. As the conference ended, he handed me his card. "If you're ever in San Francisco, let me know. I'd love to collaborate on something." I smiled, slipping the card into my bag. "I'll think about it." Reflection and resolve. On the flight home, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Not because I was falling for him, but because he reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I was still capable of connecting with people. James's betrayal hadn't broken me. If anything, it had made me stronger, more discerning about who I allowed into my life. When I arrived home, Oliver's delighted squeal greeted me. My mom handed him to me with a smile. "He's been an angel," she said. As I held him close, I realized something profound. My happiness wasn't tied to whether or not I found love again. It wasn't about proving anything to James or Lila. It was about living my life authentically, for myself and for my son. The final lesson. In the weeks that followed, I started saying yes more often, to opportunities, to new experiences, and slowly to people. I reconnected with friends I drifted away from and even went on a few dates. Nothing serious, but enough to remind myself that I deserved happiness. As for James and Lila, I heard through mutual acquaintances that their relationship had finally imploded. Lila had moved back in with our parents, and James was working odd jobs to make ends meet. I didn't feel triumphant. If anything, I felt pity. They had tried to build a life on lies and betrayal, and it had crumbled beneath them. Meanwhile, I was thriving, not because of their downfall but in spite of it. As I tucked Oliver into bed one night, I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the resilience it took to rebuild. And now I ask you, if someone betrays you, do you think it's better to confront them immediately, or to play the long game and take control of the situation on your own terms? Let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear how you'd handle it.